All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. Really excited to have so many people joining us today. I'm just taking a quick look via YouTube, and I can see that our numbers are starting to climb. So a huge welcome to all the parents and students who are starting to tune in live from home. Obviously, we're doing things a little bit differently today with so many schools being closed across North America. Usually we'll be broadcasting live into classrooms, but today we're going to broadcast live into homes. So take a look at the right. You can see there's a chat sidebar there. Please just use the chat sidebar to introduce yourselves and send in some questions, and we'll make sure we work those into today's event. All right, so we're really excited to be taking a little virtual field trip, going behind the scenes in the Perot Museum in Dallas, Texas with Becca today to check out an exhibition called Origins, Fossils from the Cradle of Humankind. So these fossils are part of an astonishing discovery of over 1,500 fossil elements of one of our human ancestors. So in September 2015, they were identified as belonging to a previously unknown early human relative that expedition leader Lee Berger and his team named Homo naledi. So these fossils were normally kept in South Africa. For the last several months, they have been in Dallas, Texas at the museum. People being allowed to come and see these amazing pieces of our human history for the first time. And that expedition is wrapping up. So we've run events for at least the past 4 or 5 months live from the museum. And today is going to be our last one with Becca. So Becca, thank you so much for taking a little time to hang out with us today and give us a little peek at these priceless pieces of human history.
Thank you. It's pretty exciting to be here. I am in the Origins Fossils from the Cradle of Humankind exhibit in the Perot Museum. And the museum's closed today, of course. So we have the whole exhibit to ourselves. I'm locked in here with Australopithecus sediba and Homo naledi and me and now all of you. So it's great that folks are able to join us in here. So these fossils are pretty exciting fossils to have here in the United States. As Joe said, they're not usually let to leave South Africa. So for us to bring them as scientists from South Africa to the United States and put them on display for the public was a pretty exciting and unusual thing. And we actually brought 2 different species over. We brought Australopithecus sediba, which is an ancient human relative that's about 2 million years old. And it comes from a site called Malapa in the Cradle of Humankind in South Africa. And then we also brought Homo naledi, which is about 250 or 300,000 years old. And Homo naledi is found at a site called Rising Star, which is also in the Cradle of Humankind in South Africa. And Homo naledi is the ones that I work on most of the time, but I have Australopithecus sediba here with me. And sediba was pretty exciting. In 2008, Lee Berger and his then 9-year-old son Matthew were out exploring in the cradle, and Matthew saw a bone sticking out of the rock. And he showed it to his dad, and it started this whole cascade of events and all these cool discoveries that are helping us understand who we are and where we come from in a new way, different from some of the other fossils that we'd found. So right now I am sitting in a room in the exhibit that's talking about Australopithecus sediba and that discovery. If you look over the shoulder here, you can see a picture of a reconstructed sediba skeleton. And that picture, if we were close enough for you to read the text, that picture would tell you that sediba has a mosaic of characteristics. That means he's sort of a mishmash of some things that look a lot like us and some things that look a lot like our more ancient relatives. For example, sediba's got a really small head and a really small brain, sort of more like a chimpanzee's than a modern human's, but they were upright walkers. Their legs and the rest of their body and their feet are all adapted really well for walking upright. So sort of a mix of combinations which is interesting. And I was able, because we're alone in the exhibit today, I was able to open up the fossil case and pull out one of the bones. Let's see if I can get the camera aimed at you here. All right, so what you can see here, I'll put a little scale there so you can see the difference in size. The scale is about 10 centimeters long, that measuring stick. What you're looking at here is a clavicle. This is the bone that Matthew found sticking out of the rock in 2008. And this is the real bone. This bone right here, well, it's a fossil now, but this fossil is 1.9 1.98 million years old. It's the real thing. It's not a cast or a replica or a duplicate or anything. It's the original bone that Matthew found. And this is a clavicle. When it's all together, it's sort of an S-shaped bone. And you can find your own clavicle in the very front of your shoulder right here. If you feel along the very top of your shoulder right there, you can feel that S-shaped bone, and that's your clavicle. And this one right here is Sediba's. And this clavicle comes from a particular individual Sediba that we've nicknamed Karabo. And Karabo means answer in one of the local languages in South Africa, near the Cradle of Humankind. There's some more of Karabo. And I think that calling this guy the answer is a little bit ironic, because he's helped us actually ask more questions than he's given us answers. We've learned a lot, but now we have loads more questions to answer. So here you can see his skeleton laid out. All the way down, you can see all of those vertebrae, and then some bits and pieces of his legs. But you might notice that Karabo is missing some pieces. And if you bear with me, we'll walk over around the corner here. We can see where some of Karabo's other pieces are. Here we go. So when Matthew and Lee and all the rest of the scientists found the bits of Australopithecus sediba, they were stuck into rock, and that rock is called breccia. And this is a big block of breccia that still has some of Karabo, that particular sediba's bones, stuck in them. And if you look closely, you can see some curvy bones that are ribs. There's a part of a scapula. There are some vertebra and the sacrum, that part that's right at your very low back. Right? And these bones are all stuck in the rock still. And one of the reasons they're stuck still in this rock and haven't been removed is that it takes a really, really long time to get these bones out. People like my friend Zendile here. Zendile is a fossil preparator in South Africa. She's been working on that particular block, and it has taken her more than 2 years to just expose these bones here. So it's pretty slow going. Another reason that these bones are still in the rock, well, apart from the fact that it looks really cool, is that we're still learning new ways to study these bones. And there may be information in the rock itself, and there may be ways through using some fancy scanning devices that we can study the bones without having to take them out of the rock. And that's just one of the ways that we're sort of pushing the science forward and learning new things by studying these ancient human relatives. There's a life-size reconstruction of an adult female Australopithecus sediba right there. And you can see she's smaller than me, and I'm not very big. Here, there we go. There she is. And I'm not very tall. So if Karabo's skeleton were all put together, he looks really tall the way he's laid out. If his skeleton were all put together, he'd stand, maybe a little bit more than 3.5 feet tall. So he's pretty short. And one of the reasons he's small is because sedibas weren't very big, but also this particular skeleton is a juvenile, so he's still growing. And if you are at home and you are a young person who's still growing, and you have a grown-up person who's already finished growing next to you, you, the small person, the young person, has more bones in your body right now than the grown-up person, because your bones haven't completely fused together. They're still growing. There's things called epiphyses that'll grow onto the ends, grow together to make your bones, your long bones, long and solid. And we can see that Karabo is still sort of in that stage of growth when we look at his bones. We can also tell that he's still a young individual when we look at, let's see, can you see his teeth there, Joe? Not really?
Yep, they're showing up in the light. Yep.
Showing up in the light? Oh, great. So you can see his teeth, and that's one of the other ways we can tell how old Karabo was when he died. His teeth also are great for telling us the kinds of things that he ate. So some of my colleagues who specialize in the teeth and in the diet of these ancient human relatives, they took dental scrapers, just like your dental hygienist uses, and scraped out the gunk from between his teeth and looked at it under a microscope, and were able to tell the kinds of plants he was eating. So things like bark and some different kinds of tough grasses and all that. We could tell that from the stuff that got stuck between his teeth 2 million years ago. That's pretty fun. Also a little bit icky. All right, so that's Australopithecus sediba. He's 2 million years old, and we're going to go into another room now, and I'll try to walk smoothly. here. Perfect timing. Maybe this will show up. Yep. So you can maybe see that video there of Sediba walking. Amy Zhang and Jerry De Silva and some other scientists were able to study Sediba's bones and then use computer animation to show us what Sediba might have looked like when he was walking. And he walks upright like us, but there's some other funny things that he does as he moves around. Like he wiggles his hips a lot more than we do, we think, as we study his bones. So we're going through our little time tunnel here into 2000. We made the first discoveries in, and this is the part where I am one of the researchers on. Let's see. We'll get over here to a picture of the cave. So in 2013, a discovery was made in the Rising Star Cave in South Africa that was really surprising to just about everyone involved. There were a whole new section of the cave that nobody knew about. It wasn't on any of the maps. And in that new section of the cave, we found bones. And not just one or two, but hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of bones. I think we're close to 2,500 bones now, since we've been excavating there for 6 years. And it's tricky getting into this cave. There's one part, we have to do a lot of crawling and climbing over boulders and going underneath this thing called the Superman crawl. And then there's one part of the cave that is 18 centimeters wide that we have to squeeze through. So that's about the size of a dollar bill. We have a little mock-up of it here so you can get a sense of what that's like. There we go. This is about what it feels like inside that section of the cave. It's pretty small in there. It's also really fun. And if you want to experience what that's like, you could do what I did before I started working in Rising Star Cave. When I got offered the position, I crawled under my bed and hung out underneath my bed for a while to feel what it was like to be in a tight space. Just happened that from my bed to underneath my bed to the floor was 18 centimeters. So I got to feel what that was like. So let's see, we're gonna keep walking backwards here. Hopefully not gonna run into anything. There's my friend Marina sitting in part of the Rising Star Cave near the entrance. It's a really, really beautiful cave system. And we have a team of, there's 6 or 8 of us that do the excavations. And then we have a cave exploration team who go exploring Rising Star Cave and lots of other caves in the area looking for more bones. And one of those cave explorers, Dirk, took all these lovely photographs inside the cave so we could see what it's like. It's also a little crazy to walk backwards through the cave here.
So Becca, I just want to jump in. I have that video queued up. Would now be a good time to show a little bit of the...
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. All right, well, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to take a quick look at what it was like crawling through the Rising Star Cave system. So here we go.
I was the first scientist to go into the cave once the actual remains had been discovered. I looked down and just thought, oh, really? I may perhaps have bitten off more than I can chew. But, you know, at the same time, the excitement of what we were about to do overwhelmed that fear. And yeah, I'm perfectly prepared to shove myself where I don't belong. I got this job by answering a Facebook ad.
I put a call out on Facebook saying I need skinny scientists who are not claustrophobic in a dangerous and difficult environment.
And so I applied thinking, well, you know, give it a shot. A couple of days later, I got the email saying, you know, you're in. God, this place is beautiful. You're just pushing into somewhere entirely new. And I can imagine that's how the astronauts felt when they were going out into space for the first time. You just thought, no one else has done this. And, you know, Lee's grand plan, the whole team's grand plan, if there had been a serious accident deep in the cave, was that we would have had to send a medical team to them, and they would have had to live underground until they could get themselves back out again.
Critical issues. No one.
All right, so I'm going to come back from that screen share now. So Becca, I think that gives a really good picture of kind of what the cave looked like and the crazy commute you had to make squeezing through some of those tight little pinches. I believe some of them were about as wide as a dollar bill.
That's right. Yeah, about the narrowest one getting into the main part of the cave where we find most of the fossils is about as wide as a dollar bill. And the distance from the surface where we go from broad daylight to starting to go underground to where we find most of the fossils is about 200 meters, so 2 football fields. And it takes us anywhere from 20 minutes to 2 hours to cover that distance, depending on what we're carrying. We're carrying lots of heavy, fragile fossils. It can take us up to 2 hours. And if we're empty-handed, it maybe takes us 20 minutes to go those 2 football fields. That's still pretty slow going. Hey, you could run or walk even 2 football fields faster than 20 minutes. So once we get in there, we find these bones, these fossils of another ancient human relative called Homo naledi. And they're dated to about 250 or 300,000 years old. And we have a reconstruction of what we think Homo naledi might have looked like in life. Right here, let's see, there we go. So this is an individual that we call Neo. He's a adult male Homo naledi, and he's standing on a little bit of a platform, but pretty close to my size, so a little under 5 foot tall. And these are, let's see if we can, sorry for all the wiggling. Those are Homo naledi's bones there. See, there's a lot of reflection with the lights and the case, but you can see his spine and his arms here, and then his skull is actually in several pieces because it's too fragile to assemble back together. And then we even have the top part of his legs right there. Oops, I can't point very well, but you can see them. But we do not have Neo, this particular individual's lower legs. So how do we make a big sculpture like that, life size of Neo, if we don't have all of his bones? Well, we have lots of bones from other Homo naledi. We have probably 18 at least individuals represented across all of the bones. So what we don't have for Neo, we're able to look at the bones from the other ones and sort of assemble a skeleton. This right here is a 3D print of one of the other Homo naledi's feet. So one of Neo's fellow naledi's feet that we found, pretty close to being articulated when we found it. And you'll notice that it looks like he's got one really long big toe and the rest of his toes are short. And that's not actually true. It's just that we don't have the rest of the bones stuck onto this model here. They weren't found in exactly the right anatomical position. But from these bones, we're able to figure out things like how flat were Homo naledi's feet and how did he walk? And from things like their arm bones, we're able to figure out how they might have used their arms. And we know that Homo naledi was probably a pretty good climber, even though they were also still a good walker. So I got a question for those of you watching at home. Do you know where in your arm this bone goes? Give you a minute to think about it.
All right, so we will check the chat sidebar shortly.
All right, so this is a humerus, and so it's your upper arm, and it is Neo's, what is this, my left side, his left humerus. It goes right here in his arm, and we have, this is a 3D print of the bone, so it's not the real thing, but we have the real bone, the original, right? Let's see, can you see it? Right there. And so by having these 3D prints and being able to study them and compare the original bones and the models of the bones and our own bones and bones of lots of other species, then we're able to figure out how Homo naledi moved similarly or differently from us, and how Homo naledi might be related to us or to other species. Let's see, what else can I tell you? Joe, do you have any questions to start?
Yeah, we've got questions starting to come in online. I can see we've got a nice big group. I'm going to just give a few shout outs that I can see here. We've got a group with us in Woodbridge, Connecticut, another group in Birmingham, Alabama, Thunder Bay, Ontario in Canada, Surrey, British Columbia, Virginia. Where else? New Jersey. So we've got lots of groups hanging out with us. Wisconsin. So that's great to see so many groups. Minnesota, more in Virginia. All right, awesome. So first thing I want to say, Becca, is I always, when we do this event, it's always amazing to me to see so many fossils, because as we've talked about before, finding something like a tooth can be a huge deal.
Yeah.
So having so many fossils representing two species of our ancestors is pretty amazing.
Yeah, it really is. You know, some of the species that we think about as when we learn about human origins and our ancient human relatives, we only know from a few bones. For example, we hear a lot about the Denisovans, which are an ancient human relative that is sort of found in, well, not in South Africa anyway, we won't go there. And when those were first discovered, they were only known by a single part of a pinky finger. And that was what named a whole new species. And that's crazy that we can identify a whole new species just from one finger and then learn a whole lot about it. And it's a very interesting species. So when we have a species like Sediba or naledi that we have almost complete skeletons of, that's really unusual and very exciting for us as scientists to be able to not just look at one bone and try to get DNA and that kind of thing, but look at lots of bones and really figure out how they were put together and how they might have interacted with each other and with their environment.
All right, so let's keep those questions coming in online, and we'll start with a few now. We've got Pamela, and she is wondering if the ancient human mouths and teeth, how are they similar or different to ours today?
Yeah, both Sediba and naledi have really good, well-preserved teeth. And we can see that their teeth they have the same number of teeth as we do, and their teeth are arranged the same way, the same number of molars, incisors, canines, and all of that kind of thing. One of the big differences from naledi to us, Homo sapiens, is that Homo naledi's molars, their back teeth, get larger as you go back in their jaw. So their third molar is larger than their first molar. And that's the opposite of us. A lot of us have to have our third molars taken out because those are our wisdom teeth, and there's just not enough room in our jaw for them. But even so, they're smaller than our first molar. So that's one of the differences in their teeth and ours. And we can see, when we look at their teeth, we can really see how they were using their teeth and helps us give clues about what kinds of things they might have been eating. But in general, their teeth look an awful lot like ours. There's some real subtle differences, but generally they're like ours.
All right, very cool. Let's grab another question. So we have Alexis, and Alexis is wondering, how long did it take from finding the first bone or fossil to finding the next one?
Wow. Well, with Homo naledi, in the Dinaledi chamber where we first found those bones, when we went into the chamber, it wasn't that we saw one little bone. It was that there were lots of bones on the surface, sitting on the sediment that we could see. So in Dinaledi chamber, we find bones really, really quickly. It takes a long time to excavate them, but we find them really quickly. With Australopithecus sediba, where the bones aren't just sitting out on the sediment, they're stuck inside of rocks, it's a little bit harder. That team can sometimes see bones sticking out of rocks, and so they know where to look, but then they have to take those rocks back to the lab, those big chunks of rock back to the lab, and sometimes they'll CT scan them, so to get a glimpse of what's inside to know if there's bones inside the rock or not. So it's different depending on the context.
All right. Great question starting to come in now. Let's grab another one here. Okay, this one's from Beth in Virginia, and she is wondering, with so many of the bones of naledi being found deep underground in one chamber, how do you suspect that these ancestors, why they were doing this? Do you think that they were deposited in this chamber?
Yeah, that's our hypothesis. We, as scientists, our whole team hypothesizes. We think that Homo naledi was deliberately putting their dead into this chamber. So we can look at the bones and we can look at the context of the cave and see that, for example, they didn't fall into the cave because the ceiling of the cave is all solid and was at Homo naledi's time as well. So we know they didn't fall in. We can look at their bones to see if they were drug in by a carnivore? Are there teeth marks there? Did they get washed in by a flood? All of these other things. And when we go through all those different possibilities, we come up with that those things didn't happen. And we're left with this idea that maybe they were taking the dead Homo naledi, their dead fellows, and bringing them into this chamber on purpose. And that's a pretty interesting thought, because this deliberate disposal of the dead is something that a lot of people thought only us, only Homo sapiens did. And we're seeing the evidence of this behavior in Homo naledi. Now, we don't know why they were doing that. They didn't leave us a blog or anything to tell us why these bodies were ending up there, but we can see the evidence of the behavior that they were doing it.
All right. Pretty amazing. It's a pretty, not only as an archaeologist are you finding the bones, but then there's a huge mystery to kind of discover afterwards too.
Yeah.
So many things to think about. All right, let's see. Here we go. So here's a question from Molly, and she's wondering, is there one site in particular that you've had the most luck, and how was that cave discovered in the first place?
Yeah. So we can talk about the Rising Star Cave for this. Rising Star was a cave system that was known, known for something like 50 years. Amateur cavers, hobbyist cavers, people who like to go underground for fun after work, would go into Rising Star Cave. In fact, if you called up the local caving club before 2013 and said, hey, I want to try caving, they might have taken you into Rising Star. It has some beautifully decorated chambers, with all kinds of speleothem, stalactites and stalagmites and all of that. And it's a great place to go and just experience caving. And when Lee Berger was sending out some amateur cavers out into the cradle to start looking for fossils in other caves, one of the places they went was Rising Star, and they discovered this little fissure that they didn't think anybody had ever gone down before. So they went to check it out, and it wasn't on the existing cave maps, and that's where the fossils were. So it was a little bit of happenstance, a little bit of luck that this was discovered, but then also some sort of manufactured luck, right? Made our own luck, that we know that fossils are found in caves in South Africa. That's where geologically they end up being preserved. So if you're going to look for fossils, you should look in caves. And it just happened they were in one of the caves that people thought they knew really well.
All right. So Connor has sent in a question, and Connor's wondering, from the fossils found so far, could you determine the cause of death for any of the Homo naledi?
For any of the Homo naledi, no. We can't determine cause of death yet. No, we don't see any kinds of injuries or evidence of disease or anything like that that would be their cause of death. That's different from the 2-million-year-old fossils, the Sediba fossils. It's pretty easy to see how they died. They fell in a hole. They actually did fall into a sinkhole, and we can see the injuries from those falls in their bones. But with Homo naledi, we don't know how they died. It's a mystery still.
All right, jumping back onto YouTube, lots of great questions coming in. Thanks so much, everybody who's tuning in and sending in these amazing questions. So let's grab another one here. So Riley is wondering, with the fossils in the Rising Star system, have you had to dig deep to find them?
Most of the fossils we find in the Rising Star system are, they're within the top, say, 15 or 20 centimeters of the sediment in the cave. So we're already 30 meters underground, but we haven't had to dig very deep into the dirt inside the cave to find them.
All right. So Claire, Jake, and Kate in Birmingham, Alabama want to know how many full or intact fossils were found in the cave system.
I'm not sure quite how to interpret that. If you mean full skeletons, we don't have any skeletons that are, completely put together. They seem to be more in a jumble. And we do have some parts of the body, parts of the skeletons that are sort of intact or articulated. We found a really beautifully articulated hand from Homo naledi that was sort of in this position when we found it. And there's 26 bones in your hand and wrist, and we found 25 of them, all but one little bone from the wrist, all laid out just as if they should have skin on them in their exact anatomical position. So that stuff's pretty exciting when we find those pieces of bones that are articulated or the way they should be in the body.
All right, so Michelle is wondering about Homo naledi and Homo erectus. Can you give us a few differences between the two?
That's an interesting question that some people think that when we first found Homo naledi, some people thought that maybe it was Homo erectus because we find Homo erectus in lots of places in the world for a really long time. There's evidence of Homo erectus for something like 1.5 million years or more. And then here you've got Homo naledi sort of overlapping with them a little bit. And could they be the same thing? But when folks like Lauren Schrader, who's up at the University of Toronto, study the brain case, the part of the skull that holds the brain and the rest of the skull together with that, they look at how Homo naledi's skull and how Homo erectus's skull are different and similar. And it turns out that Homo naledi has some similarities to erectus, but mostly it's different in the way that its brain case is shaped and in the relationship between the size of the brain to the size of the face and things like that.
All right. So Riley's wondering, this might be a tough one to answer, but he's wondering if, from looking at the fossils, if you've kind of come up with how long naledi could potentially have lived for.
Yeah, that's a question that we don't have a good answer for yet. We can see we have pieces of Homo naledis, so teeth and other bones from Homo naledis that cover the whole age range from neonates, so teeny tiny babies, to young ones, to sort of teenagers, to sort of older teenagers, young adults, and even older adults. But what we haven't figured out yet is how long did they spend at each of those stages? Were they growing up at the same number of years it takes us to grow up? Or were they growing up faster or more slowly than us? So we don't have a good answer for that yet, but lots of scientists are still studying that question and are trying to figure it out. So that would be an interesting thing to know. Did they live for 30 years or did they live for longer than that?
All right. We've got Alyssa tuning in with us, and Alyssa is wondering about the most challenging aspects of working in the in the field that you're working in.
Yeah. I'd say challenging aspects of working in the cave itself is that when we're underground, it looks like, oops, it's not going black. I was trying to make that look black. It looks completely black underground. There's no light at all. And that's pretty challenging. We have to make sure we have lots of batteries and all kinds of backups in case we lose power or our batteries go out, so we can find our way back out again. It's also one of the fun things about working there. And I think for working in archaeology and in paleoanthropology as a whole, one of the challenging things is that we have lots of questions and we're trying hard to answer all these questions. And sometimes we can't quite seem to answer them fast enough. And lots of scientists are okay with saying, I don't know, but it can be a tough thing for people who want answers to hear that we don't know yet. We're still trying to figure it out.
Well, I think it's fair, though, that, when these mysteries stretch millions of years, that there is going to be a little bit of time taken as we kind of figure things out and try to find more pieces that can help kind of fill in some of those blanks.
That's right. And the technology changes. So, questions that we had 3 years ago, we couldn't answer 3 years ago, but now we're starting to be able to because there's been new technology and new research methods developed.
All right. So a few people are wondering, Shane in particular is wondering, were there other living things in the caves with you while you were working?
Yes, there are other living things in the cave with us when we work. There are bats, and there are, at the entrance to the cave, there are rock hyrax. They're these little fuzzy things. They're called dussie or rock hyrax. They're kind of cute, but they poop a lot and leave these big piles of sort of poop around the entrance to the cave. There are some snakes that come by the entrance to the cave. Those aren't quite so nice. There are porcupines, which are fantastic because they drop their quills near the entrance to the cave. And then we use their quills that they drop as excavation tools to get the bones out. And then once in a while, we see some cave adapted insects when we're deep down underground. And, you know, things that are adapted for living in the dark don't tend to have a lot of color. They might be white or translucent. So every once in a while, we'll see one of those, an insect that's well adapted for living in the cave. And that's cool. It's neat to see that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. Talking about that porcupine quill is a lot of people are probably picturing a lot of really high-tech tools and such, and I'm sure there are some of those, but a lot of what you use for that fine kind of excavating, it can be, you know, pretty simple everyday objects like little spoons and paintbrushes and such.
Yeah, we use toothpicks or little bamboo skewers, like for cocktail skewers, and paintbrushes and plastic spoons. And my favorite is the porcupine quill, especially when we get real close to bones, because you can work really carefully. It's sharp and it's got a nice point to it. And then, so we use really basic stuff like that we just pick up at the grocery store. And then we have some other fancy equipment like ground penetrating radar or 3D white light scanners and fancy camera equipment and things like that that we use underground. And then of course, when we get into the lab, the technology ranges from a simple screen, like a window screen kind of thing that you put the dirt on and sift to find little tiny pieces of bone that might be in the dirt, to really high tech stuff like micro CT scanners and all kinds of fancy equipment that the geologists use to analyze the dirt and the rocks inside the cave.
All right. So another question that we have here from Emily. Emily is wondering, how many years have you been going into the cave to find naledi fossils? And then I'm just going to add to that question, is there still a lot of work left to be done in the cave?
So Homo naledi's bones were first discovered in 2013, and in September we started working there in November of 2013, and I was part of the first group that went in to do the excavations. And we are still working in Rising Star Cave. So what is that? Nearly 6 years later, we're still finding fossils there, and we're still doing all kinds of research in the cave. And there are dozens of years more of work to do there. So there's loads and loads of bones, and there's loads of other questions that we're trying to answer about how the cave formed, how Homo naledi got there, what's happened in the 300,000 years since Homo naledi was there. And so, yeah, there's loads of work, and people who are still in school today, if they're interested in this, there'll still be work when you get to university and can start doing this kind of research.
All right. Well, I think that's a really great thing about science is you come into a problem with a handful of questions and then more keep coming. So yeah, as you want to find more, learn more, good scientists always come away with even more questions. All right. Let's throw a two-parter here. So the first one, Alexis is wondering about your favorite part about going into the Rising Star Cave. And then to build on that, our group in Alabama are wondering how long you can stay in the cave at a time. Like how long can you stay for one session?
Sure. So I'm usually underground for 6 or 7 hours at a time. That's about as long as we can stay down there before we need a snack. And, you know, it's sort of mentally taxing to be doing this excavation work and to be underground at the same time. So 6 or 7 hours at a time. And my favorite part of working at Rising Star is the people that I get to work with. Many of us have been working together for 6 years now. And so we've got a lot of trust in our team, and we know each other pretty well, and we know who has which strengths and who needs support where. And that's just fantastic. And, you know, to be able to work with a team underground, a core team underground, and then 150 or more scientists all over the world, all trying to answer these questions from, you know, with our different specialties and from different perspectives. That's my favorite part, to be part of this really big team.
All right, very cool. And it is a pretty amazing team. And I know we've kind of touched on this before, and the way that the initial team of underground astronauts came together was a Facebook ad, which I think is pretty awesome, to kind of answer a Facebook ad that says we need some, you know, archaeologists and paleoanthropologists, but you have to be a certain size. Yeah. I'm sure that maybe those don't come up so often.
No, they don't. When I saw the ad, it was sort of like, you know, it described me pretty well, I thought, and I hoped that when I applied, that Lee Berger would see that it was describing me as well. So paleoanthropologists or archaeologists. I'm an archaeologist. who have good excavating experience, which I did in 2013, who had caving and climbing experience, and I had those things from what I did before I became an archaeologist, and who could fit into the cave and were happy to go and work in a small space. And that I was happy for that, and I was happy to go to South Africa and be able to join the team.
All right, so a few questions are coming in. Aaron is wondering about predators. Do you have, it might be hard to determine, you know, for sure, but do you have any ideas about what kind of predators naledi might have had, or maybe even Sediba?
Yeah, so for Sediba, we have found, the team have found other fossils of other animals at the Malapa site and at sites really nearby. So we do have a good picture of what kind of predators were around. And there's one called Dinofelis. Unfortunately, the picture's way in the other room, so I can't show it to you, but it's called Dinofelis, and it's sort of one of those big-toothed cats that looks pretty scary, a really big cat with some large sort of saber teeth. And that certainly would have been something that was menacing to Sediba. And then there are some other sort of smaller carnivores that we found fossils of. For naledi, there are also some big cats, not so much the saber-toothed kind, but more that look like the big cats we see today. And those certainly would have, you know, been a challenge on the landscape for Homo naledi. But with Homo naledi, we know a little bit more about some of the herbivores that were around, some of the different kinds of antelope and those kinds of things that were around than we know exactly about the predators from the fossils we find nearby.
Okay, so Becca, one thing I'm going to start doing in the chat sidebar is, a few years ago, we did live events from underground in the cave system.
Yeah.
You joined in, Marina joined in, Lee was in the control center of the cave. So for the students and the parents tuning in right now, I'm going to start posting some of those YouTube links into the chat sidebar. And if you want to dig a little bit deeper, you can see some of the events we did from live underground as Becca and members of her team were actually, you know, excavating some of these fossils in real time. So I'm going to start posting those in about a minute. And we'll grab another question here. Elizabeth is wondering about speaking. Is there any evidence that they might have maybe not speak, but had some form of communication?
Yeah. If we look at the behavior that we see from them, this idea that they were deliberately disposing of their dead, then they probably were communicating with one another somehow. We don't know if they were speaking exactly, like the way we think of speaking. Some of my colleagues have been able to make a mold of what their brain looked like by studying the inside part of the skull. And when you look at that mold, that endocast of the brain, we see development in their brain that is similar to areas of their brain that's similar to where we have development in our brain. So even though they had a small brain that was about the size of a grapefruit, we think that they had a pretty complex brain. And maybe that means that they were making and or using tools, and maybe also communicating in more complex ways closer to how we're communicating. But we're still working on that one, still trying to figure that out. Joe, there's there's an article that Marina and I wrote we wrote it for sort of middle school learners, all about Neo. That might be a useful thing to link in the chat bar as well. It's called Meet Neo.
Meet Neo. I will look that up really quickly, and I'll make sure to add that in. So I'm just adding a few of those links into the chat sidebar right now if you want to check out some of those live events we did underground. And while I look for that article to post that as well, we've got a question about tools. Any evidence of tool use found in the cave so far?
Yeah, in the cave itself, we haven't found any tools, which is unfortunate. We wish we would. We're still looking. But what we have found, I'd mentioned that articulated hand earlier. When we study that hand, we can see that hand was pretty well adapted for making and using tools. It has the structure that, you know, it could do good precision grips and have some pretty good strength with that. So we have this hand that's capable of tool use, this brain that's complex in some ways that might be suggestive of using tools. And then when we get on the surface in this region in the Cradle of Humankind, we have a bunch of stone tools that date to about 250 or 300,000 years ago, which is the same time as Homo naledi. we used to think that those tools had to have been made by Homo sapiens because we thought that they were alone there. There was no other hominins there. Now we've got Homo sapiens and Homo naledi. Homo naledi seems like they could have been able to use tools, and we have tools. So it's making us ask that question, was Homo naledi using tools? Unfortunately, we haven't yet found a Homo naledi hand holding a tool. That would be, that would be great to find one of those, but we haven't found that yet.
All right, Becca, can you hit me with the name of that article one more time?
Yeah, it's called Meet Neo, and it came out in January through Frontiers for Young Minds.
Okay. So I've also posted in the YouTube link, we've got tons more virtual field trip events coming up over the next few weeks or longer. So take a look at that link and find some more events. I want to give a huge shout out to all of the classrooms, or sorry, I'm so locked in the classrooms, all of the home classrooms with students and parents from across North America who joined live today. Thank you for sending those amazing questions. And we look forward to seeing your groups tuning in more and more as the weeks go by. And Becca, it's been an absolute blast, from hosting events underground to hosting events in Dallas, Texas with the actual fossils. Thank you so much for dedicating so much time over the last few months to make sure that we could blast these events to classrooms and now groups at home.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for making it possible for everybody to get to see these things.
All right. Well, normally I'd turn on all the mics and get everybody to be a huge goodbye and thank you. So hopefully people will send a few messages in the chat sidebar with some goodbye and thank you. And looks like they're already coming in already. People saying this has been fascinating. Thanks for taking the time to teach us. Such a good experience. Thanks for having us. So everybody had a blast today. So thanks so much, Becca. Good luck getting the bones safely packaged and returned to their home in South Africa.
Thanks. Thank you.
All right. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll see you with more events in the coming weeks.